But yeah, it's pretty clear that that's what they're putting across. When you get into symbology, when you start studying the dark occult, when you start looking into Satanism, they're very dark areas. But if we want to understand what's being done to us, if we want to understand how our consent and free will consciousness is being used against us, then you need to look into these subject areas. These are the greatest gifts that we are given by the creative force behind the universe, the capacity for free will, the capacity to consent to things or not. And it's being hijacked and it's being taken away from us and used against us. It's being weaponized. And we need to understand this, and we need to gain back our power, because it's the only way to reverse what's being done to us. I think we can probably, sum up some of that at the end as we finish off. But just to throw another picture into the mix here, here's an old one of the Beatles, Yellow Submarine. This would have been 1968, I believe, and some very interesting stuff going on here. We have Paul McCartney, or is it? If we get into the whole area of the suggestion that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an imposter, we really will be here all night. Maybe that's one for another show. But there's this whole world of research, which is known as PID, or Paul is Dead, which goes into this very strong suggestion that the guy we think of today as Paul McCartney is not the original James Paul McCartney, and that somewhere along the line in 1966 he was replaced for whatever reason. I always put a sort of disclaimer or caveat on that one when I mention it by saying I do realize how preposterous and ridiculous that suggestion sounds when people hear it for the first time. It did to me, but do the research, look into it, have a look at the evidence, and see where it takes you, because there's a whole world of symbolic clues in terms of lyrics, in terms of Beatles album sleeves, in terms of little things that have been said in interviews over the years, in terms of strange anomalies and discrepancies over the decades that take some debunking. If somebody's going to scoff at this and say that's ridiculous, this can't possibly be true, they've got many, many hundred strange anomalies to debunk credibly before they can relax into the smug assurance that this can't possibly be the case. I just throw that in there for anyone that does want to do a bit of research into this area, because there's a whole wealth of information that you could delve into. So we'll leave that one there for now. But anyway, here we have the character thought of as McCartney throwing up that 6, and we have John Lennon doing the sort of horned hand sign, which is another favorite of the industry. Sometimes it's presented with the palm facing outwards, and sometimes it's presented with the palm facing inwards. There are said to be different meanings and different connotations of this particular symbol, but I would ask people to consider why it's being thrown up by so many prominent A-list artists so frequently. Here's a very sinister one of Eminem doing it. And here we've got a few world leaders, or puppets, I should probably say, doing the same thing. These nice people. And this one comes with the cover story that this particular symbol means "I love you," and it's supposed to be a capital I, a capital L, and a capital U in deaf sign language. And so here we've got these lovely, caring people, Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bush, because they're all about love, aren't they? They're really nice people, and they're just communicating that I love you. Yeah, right. I think there's probably something else going on beneath the surface here. And sure enough, when you get into this symbol, you see that our old friend Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan was fond of this one too. And what it actually is a depiction of what's known as the horned hand. It's known as Il Mano Cornuto as well. It's evoking this kind of demonic entity that seems to be revered by the dark controllers of the entertainment industry. Many researchers think that it's a depiction of this entity known as Baphomet, this sort of androgynous otherworldly entity that was devised by Eliphas Levi in the 19th century, famous occultist and Freemason. And we see Baphomet cropping up quite a lot in music videos and record sleeves and things like that. And then other researchers say that it's supposed to be Pan or Moloch or some of these other entities that these dark occultists also seem to revere. Either way, I would ask what place it's got in the music industry? Why should these artists be throwing up this symbol? Why do we have supposed world leaders also flashing up this same symbol? What's being communicated here? And then I've put this composite picture in of so many of these artists doing the one eye thing, the one eye symbolism. This kind of ties into the image that we saw of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye inside the capstone. You know, it's very Masonic. It's kind of a calling card of the Illuminati, if you want to refer to this network of secret societies by that name. And it's also another depiction of base consciousness. It's kind of shutting down one part of the duality, again, that exists in nature and which we humans need to be able to operate as fully functional, fully conscious beings. You know, duality has to be in place, and there has to be unity and balance between the two hemispheres of the brain and between all these different components that we have. And I think what they're communicating by covering up one eye is they're sort of shutting down that balance of unity in their consciousness. And they're showing that they've been degraded down to absolute base consciousness, you know, the minimum level of consciousness that a human can operate with in this physical realm. Again, just being totally cut off from higher spiritual and conscious capabilities. So in all these cases, it seems to me that we're getting little parts and little indicators and little reminders of the dark occult priest class and the network of these secret societies that own and control these artists. It's another aspect of putting all this stuff straight into the subconscious mind of the general public. So it gets lodged there and absorbed there, and it can have an effect on the thoughts and the behaviors and the emotions of these people at a later stage without them realizing where it's coming from. I think also it's partly a method of communication among themselves. To an occultist who sees an artist flashing up a sign such as this, it's an indication that this particular artist is a part of this program, is a part of this agenda, is a controlled and owned asset of this occult network that is running things. I think there's that method of communication going on as well. Definitely a kind of calling card or a motif or an emblem in that sense. So it is all about free will consciousness and consent in terms of the way the general public absorb all this stuff. And so moving on, just getting across this whole idea of consent, really. There are so many ways in which we are tricked into giving our implied consent or tacit approval in so many areas of our daily human lives. I'll just throw this one in. I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but this is the Georgia Guidestones, which is kind of like a public announcement of wish list of these deeply sick, dark controllers that we have presiding over humanity. They engraved some of the things that they wish to achieve into these granite guidestones in Georgia, which were put up there in 1980. And I suppose it's another aspect of them sort of putting their will and their intent out there for all to see, tying in with what I was saying earlier. If you apply your will to a particular situation enough, and you really focus on bringing it into physical manifestation, many people will tell you that you can actually bring about that kind of outcome through announcing that intention and really throwing it out there into the universe. We can all be doing this as well. You know, it's not just the domain of these dark controllers. This is a dynamic which is available to all conscious individuals if we would learn how to apply our will and our intent to a particular situation. And if we had large numbers of people in human society that were all focusing on a better deal for humanity and a moral and just and free situation in which we could all live, that could be brought about very quickly. It is possible to overwrite this very malevolent system, this fear-based dynamic in which we're all living, this evil situation in which we find ourselves. It would be a very quick and fairly straightforward process to overwrite that with something much better and much freer and much fairer if people would learn how this dynamic works and apply it in their lives in massive numbers, I feel. Digressing again, but sometimes you have to. So yeah, we had this wish list of the controllers of humanity, the powers that shouldn't be, and the main one that researchers have focused on is probably the most disturbing one, which is their wish to, as they put it, maintain humanity under 500 million or 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. So what's that all about? There's reckoned to be somewhere around 7 billion people currently on the planet. And they seem to be putting their wish into this set of guidestones to reduce that figure to 500 million, which is a pretty dangerous thing when you get into it. So it's not as if they haven't told us what they plan to do. And of course, anyone that's paying attention will be aware that there is a population reduction agenda in place, very much tied in with the eugenics movement and very much tied in with various aspects of Agenda 21 that's coming out of the United Nations. And there are various measures in place to do just that, reduce the global population. It's something that people do need to be aware of and pay attention to, I would suggest. But yes, it's all about them announcing what they want to do, and it's all about us giving our consent to it. And for the presentation that I did at New Horizons, so this would have been featured in the video of the other week, but it probably bears some repeating, I put together some other ways that I've identified in which our consent is kind of used against us, in which it's weaponized, in terms of them telling us what they're doing to us and giving us the opportunity to object, opt out, withdraw our consent. And when we don't, the emphasis is on us. We chose it, we bear the consequences. So one of the things that I identified was the fact that whenever they announce a foreign war, such as, you can't call it a war, but the massacre and the slaughter that has been announced in the last few days on Syria in the wake of these false flag bloody Paris hoaxes that happened the other week, they're telling us about it, aren't they? We've had Cameron up there on the public stage in the UK saying we have to go and bomb Syria, we have to go after ISIS, and all this absolute bullshit that they try and sell to the general public as justification for their murderous actions. But you notice they never just go steaming right in to do it. You would think that if they just want to dominate a foreign nation, if they just want to cause mayhem and murder and war and bloodshed and take over natural resources and continue to occupy different parts of the world, they would just go right ahead and do it. But the fact that they feel the need to come up with some bogus bullshit excuse for doing it, like staging false flag terror events and inventing this so-called terror group called ISIS out of nowhere, I'm sure we all understand that there's no such thing in terms of the way it's presented to us, and it's actually Western governments and intelligence agencies that have created this group, same way as they did with Al-Qaeda, which you don't hear too much about these days, do you? They seem to have been retired. But they come up with these excuses for going into foreign nations and causing all this violence and madness. It's always pre-announced. They let us know what they're doing, and they seem to think that they can gain our consent in that way. I suppose the vast majority of the general public do still go ahead with these things because, unfortunately, the vast majority of the general public do still believe everything they see on the mainstream news and which they read in so-called newspapers, because it's so difficult for many people to accept that the world is so different to the way we've been brought up all our lives to believe that it is. And when you come to a grudging acceptance of the fact that the world is nothing like what we're told it is by governments and mainstream media, you have to make a lot of changes in your life in terms of your mindset and your whole paradigm. And sometimes that has physical repercussions in terms of, your behaviors. Maybe you can't continue to work for a particular institution when you come to realize this. Maybe you have to give up a particular job. Maybe you can't be with a particular circle of friends. Maybe you can't be in a relationship with a particular person. So it has a major impact on people's lives, which is why so many just live in denial of these blatant truths. And so many still go along with the official version of things because life is easier that way and less distressing. So unfortunately, when you have these puppet politicians up there saying, we need to go to war to protect these people and we need to strike against these ISIS terrorists because they're threatening our freedoms and our way of life, people do buy into it. And when they do, they feel they've got the green light to go right in. In Britain, we have a problem of institutionalized paedophilia. This will be the case in many other countries around the world as well, but it's been particularly highlighted in the UK because this is something that has actually made the mainstream headlines. The BBC, they're ones to know. They employed bloody Jimmy Savile for 50 years that was abusing children on publicly funded BBC premises for all those years. So the BBC would know a thing or two about it, but they have actually carried stories about how many prominent politicians are actually child rapists and have been through the years. It only ever seems to emerge after they've died. It's funny that, isn't it? We've heard about former British Prime Minister Edward Heath. We've heard about Cyril Smith. And of course, the stories about Jimmy Savile only emerged after he'd actually died. So the implication is, it's only the ones that are dead now that were into it. The ones that are alive still are okay, but this used to go on. But nevertheless, it's in the public domain, and the Daily Mail has carried stories about this. The BBC and all these other mainstream outlets has told us that we have major establishment figures and prominent entertainers from over the years that have been involved in paedophilia. So we can't say we didn't know. We can't say we weren't told. Of course, it's still going on. But the implication is that, it's a historic thing. And they seem to think this gets them off the hook. When you get into things like vaccines, which so many researchers will tell you are very harmful to human health, they're not a good idea. When you get into some of the stuff that's in them, formaldehyde and mercury and aborted human fetus and monkey brain tissue and all this other horrific stuff, you can see it's not a great idea to be putting that into the veins of young children with their immune system still trying to develop. It's not a great idea to put it into the bodies of adults either. But nevertheless, when you do the research, if you're diligent enough to look into these things, it is possible to discover what goes into vaccines. They, of course, hide it in chemical names with many syllables, and it's not immediately apparent what these things are. But, the internet is there, as we've said, for research, for anyone that cares to put in the time. And you can, with your own independent research, discover some of this stuff that goes into vaccines. So basically, they've told you what's in there. You've got the opportunity to research it and look into this stuff. And if you don't like the sound of it, you've got the opportunity to say, no, I'm not taking that into my body. Again, same dynamic. They're telling you, they're giving you the opportunity to object. When you don't object, they take it as consent. Same thing with fluoride, sodium fluoride, which is going into the water supply in many countries. It goes into toothpaste. Then you have aspartame, which is very damaging to human brain cells. Not a great idea to be ingesting it. And they put it in kids' squash and fizzy drinks, of course, and kids' sweets. And then you have E numbers full of chemical components. But guess what? It's always listed in the ingredients. Certainly is in the UK anyway. If you pick up a packet of sweets and it's got E numbers in it, you'll be able to see because it lists them. If you pick up a bottle of fizzy pop that you want to buy for your kids, it will tell you that there's aspartame in it. You've got the opportunity to make an informed decision not to buy that product. And if you choose to buy it anyway, they're off the hook as they see it. Your karma, your decision. And then famously, cigarettes, we all know packets of cigarettes come with the health risks listed. They tell you you could get cancer if you smoke. And if you go ahead and smoke anyway and you get cancer, your fault, not theirs. Okay, so CCTV on buses and in public buildings, they are obliged to tell you is going on. So if you step on a bus and they're filming, there will be a sign saying CCTV in operation. You know you're being filmed. They've told you. Your consent. speed cameras on roads, they always have to put a symbol up to tell you there's a speed camera. If you get caught by one, you were told. Small print in credit card and mobile phone contracts, all this stuff that you get, page after page of minute microscopic print that you need a bloody microscope to read, and nobody bothers because it's so boring. But that's where they hide away all the stuff that protects them if a situation arises. So they're off the hook. You signed it at the bottom. You didn't read it, but you signed it anyway because you can't get the mobile phone otherwise. And that protects them. If anything, works against them, they can say, well, you signed the contract, pal, so it's on you. And then police reading you your rights. If you get fitted up, famously they say anything you say may be used against you, and so they've warned you. And so that's what it all is. And
the problem with the closed circuit television is that it's never working when we actually need images. Like in Paris, it wasn't working, and there are so many examples. So unfortunately, they're not used in our favor, but only in our disfavor, so to say. That's
well, so it seems. So it seems, especially when there's Israeli so-called security services that are in charge of the cameras. It always seems to be the case that Israeli security service cameras don't work. I don't know why anyone would hire an Israeli company based on their track record, but there it is. It's a fact. If anyone wants to get upset about that, it is a fact that in all these so-called terror events, the security cameras are always supposedly handled by Israeli security companies. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but there you go. So, what I've tried to show here, Johan, and I really hope I've tied all the pieces together, because I am aware that it's very kind of disparate and it jumps all over the place. And 1 minute I'm talking about Jay-Z videos, next minute I'm talking about the eternal truths of natural law. But I really hope that I've been able to show how this all ties together. It's something that I attempt to do in my public talks. It's something that I go into in great length in my book. In the book, it's 180,000 words over 20 chapters. So I'm really taking the time to break it down. I'm really taking the time to show many examples and bring in the work of lots of different researchers and scholars and authors into these areas over the years to attempt to show how it all fits together, because it does. And we have to understand how it all fits together. And people often say, well, what do we do about it? It's all very well understanding these methods and what's being done to us, but how do we get out of it? And so it's clear to me that they're weaponizing consent and they're using our free will consciousness against us. So the answer simply has to be to withdraw the consent and to make it clear that there is no approval on our part. We do not consent to what is being done to us. And we have to make a very clear statement that that is the case. Why would they bother creating all these bogus terror events as an excuse to start all these foreign wars if they didn't need to get that consent from us on that tacit kind of level? Why would they need to encode all these things into movies and videos and stuff if they didn't need to get our consent that way and put it into our subliminal minds in that way? It's clear to me that they realize that they, just like us, are governed by these tenets of natural universal law, and they're trying to get themselves off the hook and get out of it. And if we can understand that they're using these methods for that reason, and if we understand that they know they're bound by these laws in the same way that we are, some solutions become clear, and some ways in which we can withdraw our consent and make it clear that we are not a party to this. And when you align yourself with truth, and when you open yourself up to higher levels of conscious awareness, you resonate with it and you come to understand the things that you need to do, and you come to be guided in your actions, and it becomes clear what ways in which you should be living your life in line with morality. So we understand that foreign wars are funded by our taxes to a very large extent. We're tricked and manipulated into paying taxes, of course. And a lot of that comes from the fact that our parents are tricked into signing a birth certificate for us when we're born, which ties us into the whole sort of maritime admiralty law aspect of the so-called legal system that is operated, and we become a corporate commodity or asset owned by the Crown Corporation here in the UK and many other parts of the world. And that, as they see it, makes us their property. And, they create a kind of corporate entity in our name. And that's the point at which we become bound to pay tax to the system. And when you come to understand that tax is used to fund these foreign massacres, you realize that a very good way of bringing an end to it would be for very large numbers of people to refuse to pay tax. Obviously, if a few individuals here and there decide to stop doing that, they could be very easily picked off and made examples of, and they're people that are going to get their door beaten down by, armed thugs and thrown in jail to be made an example of. That is going to happen when only a few people are trying to make a stand. But if very, very large numbers of people, I'm talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, were all to come together and say, we're not paying our tax anymore, what are you going to do about it? They just don't have the resources and the numbers to be able to deal with that large amount of people. A good example in the UK would be a huge number of people just refusing to pay the BBC license fee, the TV license, which funds the BBC. We know that the BBC are liars and criminals. Every single night, they lie to the general public provably and blatantly about stuff that's going on in the world, and it's just pure fiction. I mean, Building 7, the footage of Building 7 on 9/11 collapsing behind the BBC reporter is proof positive of that, if anyone wants an example of it. And then we've got all these revelations about the paedophile ring, which is said to have existed and almost certainly still does within the BBC. So what the hell are we doing still paying to fund this disgusting organisation? There should be millions of people in the United Kingdom saying, we're not paying for this anymore. What are you going to do about it? If many, many millions of people are saying that, there's no way they can lock all these people down. They just don't have the resources to do it. So I'm putting those two out there as a couple of examples of things that can be done when large numbers of people are awakened to truth and are resolved to living their life in line with morality, in line with natural law, in line with, the do no harm but take no shit principle. There will be many other ways which become obvious to people in terms of steps that they need to take when they kind of resonate with these truths and get on that path and raise their consciousness in that way. And this is a process that needs to happen. And if there's anything that's offered me any kind of hope or optimism over the last few days, because there's not much that does these days, unfortunately, it's the fact that this latest Paris so-called terror attack is so blatantly and provably staged and is a hoax and is a false flag that I've seen many people in my circle of friends and associates that are starting to question aspects of it. And these are people that have never previously shown any kind of interest in conspiracy or truth issues. In fact, they've probably mocked them and laughed at them and had a good old chuckle, if the truth is known, at things that myself and other people have posted on Facebook and things that certain people say about stuff that's going on in the world. Many of these people would have just not taken notice and just written it all off as a conspiracy theory and had a bit of a laugh at it. But I'm seeing a lot of these people now, because the world has become that much more dangerous within the last couple of weeks, and because as far as people in the UK are concerned, it's getting a little bit close to home now. When an event goes off in Iraq or Afghanistan or even the United States, these places are far off lands. And, most people in the UK think, well, that doesn't affect me in my daily life. France is just across the English Channel from us here. It's very, very close. And I think a lot of people are reflecting on how easily that could have been London or somewhere else right here. And we're already hearing about how we're going to start getting armed troops on the streets of the UK. And, many more of our personal freedoms might get taken away, and there's going to be more surveillance. And we've heard stories about what's happening in France in terms of they can now shut down any website that they choose, and they can now barge into anybody's house and search it without a warrant and throw anybody in jail without trial if they suspect them of anything that they choose. And I think people are starting to think, my God, this is getting crazy and it's getting a little bit too close for comfort. And people are starting to examine some of the finer detail of what we're told went down in Paris, and they're starting to see that it doesn't add up. They're starting to learn about the use of crisis actors. They're starting to learn about the passport thing. There's all these passport memes that have been going over Facebook about these indestructible passports. It is waking people up. People are saying, yeah, I remember actually there's something on 9/11 about that. Yeah, how can a paper passport survive all this mayhem? Why do they keep finding these passports? Why did they find a Syrian passport at the exact point in time where they wanted to go in and invade Syria, and now they're doing just that? So if there's anything...
Yeah, the time is running out, Mark, and I think you make your point really clear. People are seeing that it's coming really close now, and the time for waking up is absolutely now. What I want to do is I'll most certainly invite you back again, because I think there's so many subjects we need to delve into much more. And you're a brilliant speaker, and you have a lot of information to share. So I'll do that. But there is a show after this one, so I need to round it up now, Mark, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.